Welcome on in to the Locked On Packers Squad show. As always, I am your host. My name is Brandon Sneide. And look, I know he just signed an extension. I know I'm his number one fan. I know he got the quarterback right. I know he went out and got Micah Parsons. But boy, oh boy, this could be a make it or break it year for Brian Gutekunst as the general manager of the Green Bay Packers.
And I'm Jacob Westendorf from Packers on SI. And I guess that, quote, worthless piece of stock is not so worthless after all, is it, Chicago?
Go, Pack, go! It's the Packers Squad. Everything Green Bay Packers every week. Covering all the big hits and game-changing plays from Titletown. The way only the Locked On Podcast Network can. From the frozen tundra with all the cheeseheads, the Packers Squad show starts now.
You are Locked On Packers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Follow the podcast over on Twitter at Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast, Apple, Google, Spotify, wherever you find audio podcasts. You will certainly find Locked On Packers, the number one Packers podcast on the internet, and the show for the fans who know what happened. They want to know why and how. Thanks to each and every one of you who continues to make Locked On Packers your first listen each and every single day. A jam-packed show on deck for you guys as always. Later on in the program, at the very end, ask us anything. No Coach Jags this evening, but you can still ask Jacob or myself any questions in regards to the Green Bay Packers, maybe about the Chicago Bears later becoming the Indiana Bears. We'll dive into that. Plus, extensions, as I've mentioned, have already been signed, but how much pressure really is on Brian Gutekunst this offseason to finally get this team over that playoff hump in the offseason officially underway. Tuesday, we were here on Locked On Packers breaking the news to you. We began our free agency focus, and yes, they need a new special teams coordinator as Rich Bisaccia is no longer. So we'll dive into all of that. And as we mentioned, 4 years, Jacob, Rich Bisaccia has been under Matt LaFleur as the special teams coordinator, 65-year-old, also serving as the assistant head coach. You've been in that locker room. You have spoken to the players. You have spoken to Rich. You have spoken to Matt. You kind of got the vibe around that locker room. Were you surprised that in the middle of February 17th to be exact, when it felt like Rich Bisaccia was here to stay, right? You listen to Brian Gutekunst. You listen to Matt LaFleur. You listen to the players that are speaking about Rich Bisaccia. It felt like he was here. Ryan Storter left. He was part of Rich Bisaccia serving under him. He left to go to Cleveland. So you're like, okay, Rich is going to be here and special teams will kind of do its thing, and we'll probably not really see much of an improvement, but at least we'll have Rich Bisaccia here. And come about 6:30 Central Standard Time on Tuesday, that was not the case. Rich was out stepping down. Were you surprised by that move?
Yeah, I was. And just because of the timing, I know that there's a couple of schools of thought about what had happened. Did the Packers kind of push him? And I'll say this, if they did, then they're going to get what they deserve in this coaching cycle, which isn't to say Bisaccia is like God's gift to special teams coordinators, but you let him wait until February 17th. Like, this isn't like 2007 when Brett Favre was deciding whether or not to come back and be your quarterback, right? This is a special teams coordinator of a group that's been, let's be honest, below average in the 4 years that Bisaccia has been here. Now, that's not all his fault. We'll get into some of that stuff too, but I think that it was February, today's the 19th. So February 18th when that news broke, February 17th, whenever it was. When 17th, the news broke.
Yes, Tuesday night.
Okay, there you go. It's February 17th when that news broke. That's 5 whole weeks removed from losing in the playoffs. The Chicago Bears, all the head coaches have been hired. They've hired their staffs. Like, they've kind of all gone all over the place, right? And Green Bay now has pick 11 in the special teams coordinators draft, if you will, and it would be kind of by choice if that is what they did. I'm not sure so Bill Huber pointed out that the phrase that was used was stepping down, not retiring. He was not fired. That's where things get a little interesting, and I can't quite figure out, and I haven't been able to listen to see other people's theories that are more connected than I am, which is certainly a lot of people, but everybody's kind of at a loss for what happened and why. I've seen some, speculation like this could have happened, like saying, hey, we're not going to allocate as many resources to, say, keeping Zane Anderson and Bo Melton, for example. And I'm just tossing names at the wall here. I'm not using them specifically, but things of that nature. And Rich is like, well, wait a minute. Or maybe Bisaccia said like, hey, I can't use Romeo Dobbs as my punt return. Like, give me somebody that can actually legitimately.
Or Matthew Golden, or Savion Williams, or Jaden Reed, and the list goes on.
Whomever, exactly. Yeah. So maybe he was saying something. Maybe there was a disagreement in that way, and Bisaccia was just kind of like, okay, well, I guess it's time for me to do something else. The other thing is, it is fair to point out that last year Bisaccia was considering retirement. I believe he even said as much himself.
Yep.
So when he's considering retirement that way, like maybe it's just as simple as that he's trying to take a break for something like that. And maybe that's the route that ultimately happened. But I mean, it's hard to reconcile. I think that's the best way to put that. But I will say that I think that the timing was odd, which is what made it surprising. Because if you're going to move on from a coach, that happens relatively early in the off season. So you can, get working on whoever his replacement is going to be. And now the Packers are doing that, 6 weeks after the season's over.
I said this on Tuesday, and I kind of want your opinion about it, because me and Peter kind of went back and forth a little bit. Then it carried over to social media. But I said it didn't matter who's in that position that Rich Bisaccia was in. Like when he was hired, I remember it was one of those hires, like you don't remember exactly where you were. Maybe some people do. I didn't. But I remember the celebration, Jacob, because we had seen subpar special teams units in Green Bay. So when Rich got hired, and we saw what he did in Las Vegas, where he kind of took them the last 8 games of the year and elevated them to a different level. I don't know if that was the year they made the playoffs, but they got close.
Did. No, they did.
They did. Okay, mm-hmm. So that was a massive year, and there was thoughts. I think he was interviewing to be that head coach to fill in that role as the interim to finish that season. So when they were able to lure him away from Las Vegas to come into Green Bay to run the worst unit out of the one of the worst phases out of the 3 phases in the NFL in the game of football with offense, defense, and special teams, and the Packers always being almost at the bottom of the barrel when it comes to rankings throughout the NFL, and you're getting that guy to come over here to run this unit. I was excited. I was thrilled, and you just didn't see any improvement year after year. His first year was his best year, but after that, it kind of collectively has gotten worse. And I've come to the conclusion, and maybe I'm off base. Maybe I'm wrong here. Maybe I'm not looking at the bigger picture, or maybe I am looking at too much of the bigger picture. The Packers haven't had a top 10 unit, Jacob, since 2007. I was still in high school in 2007. I don't know if it's going to matter who the coach is that comes in after Rich or the coach after that coach. I don't really think it matters. I do not think. I think it's an organizational issue that the Green Bay Packers are facing when it comes to special teams. And people will ask me, well, what does that mean? Why do you say that? For example, the head coach of the Green Bay Packers, Matt LaFleur, tells reporters this year, I don't know. I don't talk to kickers. The Packers haven't had a punt return touchdown since the year of 2014. That's over 10 years ago.
I was there.
They haven't had a good kick returner. I know Keyshawn had a touchdown return against the Minnesota Vikings, and that was fun and electric at Lambeau Field and really got them going in that game. Take that away. It's been forever since they've had a real decent threat returning punts and returning kicks. I don't think it matters what coach you bring in. I don't think it quite matters what the philosophy is, what the voice is in that room. If the organization is not going to take a real step into improving special teams, and it took them a while this year to actually get the starters onto the field. It took a failed field goal in Cleveland for them to be like, oh, crap, let's get some starters. Let's take Brent Banks off of the field, and let's actually put Elton Jenkins in there and put our starters into these roles. And it took weeks into the season for that change to come into place. I have no confidence, Jacob, as a fan. Now, you're there. You're covering the team. You're in the locker room. You're seeing things from a different lens than I am. But I look at this and I don't have any hope. I have no reason to look at who the next coach is going to be, whether it was going to be Rich or whoever it's going to be. And I know there are other names floating around, and we're going to get into some of those. I just don't think it matters at this point, because for the Green Bay Packers, it was like, look at the Chicago Bears with the quarterback situation up until they landed Caleb Williams. Like they couldn't figure it out. Like they tried to throw so many darts at the wall and nothing would stick. And I think that's how we are right now with special teams. It has been, almost 20 years now since they've been a top 10 unit, and I don't have any hope, optimistic feelings whatsoever that they can turn it around, whether it's Rich coaching this year, which obviously is not the case, or whoever after Rich. I just don't see it fixing itself.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. So of the two schools of thought, I lean more towards the organizational issue than I do the coaching issue. That being said, I mean, when you're the worst in the NFL, there's something to be said about the job you did that year when you finished 32nd in the NFL, which the Packers have done in the past. But you're right. I mean, Nixon, 2-time kick return, all pro, right? Other than that, they hadn't really had a kickoff returner since Randall Cobb in like his earliest days.
Short-lived, yeah.
Yep. And then as a punt returner, like we're talking Micah Hyde as in 2014, like you mentioned, that was the last time they've returned a punt for a touchdown. And I can't even think of moments where it's been like, oh, he could break this, since that time frame, right? So they've kind of been poor in that regard for a while. You mentioned 2007 is the last time they had a really good special teams. And the hope when they hired Bisaccia was that they were getting competence, average, right? Because Bisaccia, it wasn't like he was this decorated special teamer with multiple, like, oh, they were the best in the NFL 6 out of his 10 years in Oakland or, whatever it was. It wasn't anything like that. It was that they were towards the middle. And when you had an offense as good as Green Bay's was in 2021, and you were expecting that to happen again in 2022, because that was before Adams got traded and all that stuff, and Rodgers had just come off 2 MVPs and everything like that, right? The hope was that average competence would be enough. And the other thing was, Mo Drayton, not much, if any, experience as a coordinator. Ditto for Sean Menenga, who were the LaFleur's 2 special teams coordinators before hiring Bisaccia to run that team. So that's kind of where I land on that. When it comes to, is it Bisaccia? Is it the organization? Listen, you've got plenty of.
Well, do this for me. Do this for me. Sorry to cut you off, but do this for me. Pie chart of blame.
Yeah.
Ryan Gutekunst, Rich Bisaccia, Matt LaFleur. Cut it up, slice it up, however you think it is. Dice it out, hand it out. Where do you fall when it comes to the pie chart of blame for the Packers failing at their special teams?
So it's a tough question to answer for one of the reasons in that the head coach tells the special teams coordinator what players he can and can't use on his units, right? So the question I'm having is, you have a 2-time all-pro kickoff returner who doesn't return kickoffs until the playoffs. Whose decision was that? Was it Matt LaFleur's? Was it Rich Bisaccia? Was it Matt LaFleur and Rich Bisaccia kind of heeding the advice of Keyshawn Nixon?
Yeah.
I don't know. Nixon said at the end of last year he didn't want to return kickoffs anymore. He later backed off of that comment and said he would do whatever the team needed on that, but the Packers did not put him back there until the playoff game. I'll say this, as simple as this. When Gutekunst says at his press conference that they've taken steps to take special teams more seriously, he's right to some degree, right?
He has.
Zane Anderson, Bo Melton, Aaron Mosby, like guys that have been on the roster.
Yep.
Yeah, all of those guys, right? That is true. It's also true that you willingly put inferior players in those positions to only switch them when the games matter. So you can't tell me special teams matters every single game to only have your best kickoff returner in that position in one game of the season. And you're admitting he's your best kickoff returner because it's the most important game you've played to date, and he's the one who's back there, right? The other thing is throughout the year, Green Bay's punt return situation, basically since LaFleur has been here, has been dreadful. They had that one stretch with Tyler Ervin, and that's really been it. And since Ervin left, they kind of haven't figured it out since then either. Nixon has tried it a couple times. He's not comfortable catching the ball like that. Jaden Reed was not very good at it. Amari Rodgers was a disaster, so on and so forth, right?
In many ways.
Yes. But then when you think about it during this season and even last season, the Packers don't have a returner on their roster. I remember vividly Gutekunst saying after they drafted Matthew Golden, him saying like, oh, the kick return game, he hasn't done it before, but I think he can. Or something to that effect, right? Well, he hasn't done it before. Why is he out there in a regular season game? He didn't return any punts, to my knowledge, in the preseason or anything. I know they practice it, but that's different than a live bullet. And then during the season, you willingly are carrying 52 players on your roster. That means you have one open roster spot. Other times you were willingly carrying 2 kickers, including one kicker who was injured. And I don't know whose decisions those were to have McManus kick when he was hurt. Like, to me, I always kind of chuckle a little bit when people say like, well, just put him on IR. Just put him on IR, as if that makes him heal faster, right? But in McManus's case,
yeah,
he was hurt. He was kicking injured. Like, he was on the injury report for an injury for like 6 weeks. He didn't kick against Arizona. He came back against Pittsburgh, and then he kicked in that stretch until being out for a game against the Giants. Like, you could have easily tossed him on injured reserve, let him get healthy, and then maybe we're having a different conversation throughout this season about McManus than the one we're having right now. I don't know. I mean, I still think he was healthy when he missed those kicks in Chicago, so who knows? But throw it all together, I think if you have to ask me who's at fault, ultimately, I think it might even go above, like Brian Gutekunst is just this organizational Packers philosophy, like you've mentioned on some of the stuff, to just not care that much about the return game, to kind of overlook the detail of having the right offensive lineman on the field during a field goal against the Browns that ultimately cost you a game, an extra point against the Cowboys that ultimately gives them 2 points on the field, like just things like that, right? I have a hard time making a pie chart. If you had to ask me, I'll give it 35 Bisaccia. I'll give it 32.5 Gutekunst, 32.5 to LaFleur, just because you don't know who's making those decisions. And, whatever's left over, you can I'm not a mathematician on that, but whatever's left over, you can toss in as a, just organizationally. And then the players obviously deserve some blame as well. Like, ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. That's the thing too about it. Like, like fans kind of, myself at times as well, got to kind of come to grips with, like, Rich Bisaccia. Say what you want about Rich. Say what you want about Goody. Say what you want about Matt LaFleur. Rich and those guys aren't telling Romeo Doubs, hey, when they kick you, when Chicago kicks this onside kick, make sure you drop it. Or, hey, Brandon, I know you're going out there to kick this, potential game icing field goal. Like, just miss it. Let's make it interesting. Like, they're not actively doing that. Like, it does fall on the players. Like, the players.
One of the best examples I have, I remember it was Joe Barry's last season as the defensive coordinator. And every week, anytime the Packers gave up a run of 5 yards, it was #fire Barry. And I'm not suggesting Barry was good at his job. However, I do remember there was a play. They were in Chicago. They're playing against Justin Fields. And they sent Nixon on a corner blitz. And Nixon has Fields dead to rights. It's schemed up perfectly.
Yeah.
Fields makes him miss and scores on the play. That's not Joe Barry's fault. Like,
right.
He's got the player in the right position. They do not make the play. Like you were saying with, the Romeo Doubs onside kick or something like that. If the players are not put in the right positions, then yes, that falls on the coach. But if they're in the right position and they biff it, like, sometimes that just happens.
And McManus admitted it, right? In the locker room in
Said
Chicago.
It was the worst game of his life. Yeah. And kudos.
Romeo Doubs in Chicago said, I blew it. Like, it was in my arms. I had it. I let the team down. I lost the game. And
that's so when people talk about, like, I think accountability is a buzzword and nobody can tell me what the hell that it means. But, like, that's being accountable, like saying, hey, I stunk. Brandon McManus didn't say, you know what, the kicking ball was not up to snuff tonight, or what, the wind was blowing. Dobbs didn't say, like, oh, I got the sun in my eyes. It was just, I dropped it. Like, if you're talking about accountability, they're not going to cut the kicker. They can't now. Well, they can later, but they're not going to cut Romeo Doubs after blowing an onside kick against Chicago late in season. I don't know. I don't think people know what they mean when they say it. And I don't think they know what it means overall. Like, when they're saying, like, they want people to be accountable, because nobody can give me an example of, like, what that means and why, or what that would look like. Again, you can't cut everybody. If you want everybody to be accountable, and that's what that means, you're going to have 0 players on your roster by the end of the season.
So we know Rich is gone after 4 years as the Green Bay Packers special teams coach, assistant head coach to Matt LaFleur. Jacob, are there any names out there Packer fans should keep their eye on? Is there anything you're seeing? I think Bill Huber had a couple of names that were, I don't know if they were confirmed interviews or sources indicating
3 guys today. Yeah.
Yeah. I know there was one from that coached under Bill Belichick and his special teams. I know Kyle Wilbur was another name, former player who also served under Rich Bisaccia, I believe, which is another name. So is there anybody out there where maybe, fans should keep their eye on? Again, if you're like me, and I hate to be the negative Nancy of the show, but I don't really think it matters until you take active steps to actually carrying about special teams throughout the entire organization. I don't know if it necessarily matters, but is there names out there Packer fans should keep their eye on for possible Rich Bisaccia replacements? And also, another side question for you: do you think Matt LaFleur uses that assistant or associate head coach title for somebody else, maybe to lure somebody else in, or that's currently on the coaching staff?
Yeah. So for that associate head coach question, it's I don't think it's going to happen, but if I were the Packers, with the way the offensive line played last season, one of the best free agents available, and I guess he's not really completely a free agent, but is Jeff Stoutland from the Philadelphia Eagles. Coached Jordan Mailata, who was a rugby player. He's an all-pro left tackle. Jason Kelsey's a Hall of Famer. Lane Johnson's a Hall of Famer.
Those guys cried when they found out he left and 100%. Was leaving. So, yeah.
Like Landon Dickerson is a really good player under him. Isaac Sumalo is like the Eagles. I feel like the Eagles have had a good offensive line since I was 5 years old, but like Stoutland's a huge reason for that in the last few years. If Green Bay could do that and give him, associate head coach and run game, whatever you would have to do to get him here.
Well, would they keep Luke Butkus on staff? Because that's the thing. Like, it felt like, okay, the combine's next week. Like, it felt like our coaching staff was locked in place. And there's a name that I do want to ask you about that we didn't get to last week that I wanted to bring to your attention and get your thoughts. But it felt like, okay, this coaching staff's locked into place. We got, obviously we knew Hafley was going to be on his way out. You knew he was probably going to take a few names with him, and that's certainly what happened. But it felt like after all that dust settled and you had Gannon, and you got, the guys around Gannon, Bobby Babich, and you got them kind of in place. You're like, all right, here we go. Like, the combine's coming up. We got, we got the draft, obviously free agency, then the draft, and before you know it, the season's here. So this one kind of threw everybody for a loop. But do you anticipate any major other changes throughout the coaching staff? Because obviously you're going to need a special teams coordinator, but there are other names out there. But that also would mean you'd have to either, get rid of some guys that are currently on your coaching staff if you want a guy like Stoutland possibly to take over for Luke Butkus.
Yeah, and I would say this season, Matt LaFleur in a season-ending press conference basically said the offensive line did not play well enough. Gutekunst kind of echoed it and said, like, injuries, guys moving around a lot, and then the big flashing lights that felt like a big old bullseye on Rasheed Walker's back was guys in contract years for one of those. But that's a different conversation. But that's 2 years in a row now that LaFleur specifically has called out the offensive line for performance by the end of the season, because they didn't play well to close the season. Last year, losing in Philadelphia, they got Jordan Love beat up in the last game of the season.
Kind of all year last year too with Jordan.
Yeah, they were fine until they weren't, basically, and then this year they were not good, and that's 2 years in a row. I thought for sure if LaFleur was going to, because LaFleur, let's just call it what it is, whether it's because of the way the Packers do business or because LaFleur is this way, he's kind of slower to react on letting guys go. If there were a coach who I thought was maybe in his crosshairs, it would have been Luke Butkus because of the back-to-back years of calling out the offensive line. And the Packers have had guys like, Jordan Morgan probably behind the 8 ball in his development. Anthony Belton probably didn't develop the way they wanted him to this year. Just like, I don't know how much of Butkus's decision-making also is on playing Jordan Morgan at guard and playing Anthony Belton at tackle and doing all those things. And
the rotation. I'm guessing that's a LaFleur thing.
Oh man,
I still don't know if there's another team out there. I don't watch another team as close as I watch.
I have heard. I cannot clarify. I have heard the Cleveland Browns do it.
Well, that's not good. If you're in a conversation with Cleveland, it's never good. But you brought up Jordan Love. We both brought up Matt LaFleur at many different times. Before we change topics here, we had this on the rundown last week, but we just could never get to it. Luke Getsy brought on. He was the assistant last year for the Packers, assistant offensive coach, now taking over the quarterback coach for Jordan Love, a familiar name, a familiar voice for Jordan and for Matt. The outcry on social media, and I know I shouldn't use social media for anything, but it was amazing how many people, were upset, Jacob, that Luke Getsy was getting pegged as the next quarterback coach for the Green Bay Packers. What were your thoughts on the hiring there to lead Jordan Love in that quarterback room?
If I'm being real honest with you, I just don't like Getsy he's qualified. I think the worst thing that I read last week was somebody calling him he's an unqualified person for that position. That is not true. Getsy has been a quarterback's coach. He's been very successful as a quarterback's coach, and 2 of the 4 MVPs that Aaron Rodgers has were when Getsy was his quarterback's coach.
And Rodgers loved the way he coached him. Like he
Jordan Love, same thing. Jordan Love said the same stuff. Now, granted, is Love going to say, no, this guy stinks? Like, of course not. But the other thing is true is that Love is an established quarterback now. I don't think you have to worry as much. I'm not saying that coach is irrelevant, right? But I don't think you have to worry as much about the development when Love has already shown he's a high-level player, right? That being said, I understand the criticism of thinking maybe the offense, you wanted some new voices in there. I just don't know, like, I don't understand why that thought is the prevailing one of like, this absolutely needs to happen because this offense wasn't good enough. Because that's, I mean, frankly, that's not true. The offense was really good last year. I know Stenavich is the main one who's in the crosshairs. I think that has a large part to do with his comments on Matthew Golden before the playoffs, which I think were mostly benign, but whatever. And he's bald and an offensive line coach, so he's not like one of the young whiz kids or something like that too. Like, the other thing that was funny to me about the whole quarterback coach situation is I guarantee 65% of the people, maybe more, that were complaining about losing Mannion didn't know who he was or what he did until he got pulled away to Philadelphia. So,
until everybody else was like, man, that's a really good hire for the
right.
Eagles.
Which, I mean, there's pieces of evidence you can put together, right? Like Jordan Love had his best season as a pro. Malik Willis, Mannion certainly gets a feather.
But if guys are good coaches, like you can pick it up. And Matt LaFleur, like he went out of his way many times to commend Sean Mannion. So like you knew that name was eventually going to sneak out there into the coaching sphere and eventually get him hired. And that's exactly what it did.
Certainly. The question I have is just like Matt LaFleur is the head coach. He's also a quarterback's guy at his core. Adam Stenavich is the offensive coordinator. Like they've got other guys. So we're talking, third, fourth, fifth guy in command for a guy that gets to talk to Love for everything and stuff like that. I just don't know until we're at practice every day, which I am not. And, not a lot of people are, and being able to see like what goes on in the meeting rooms and stuff like that. It's hard for me to say like what this guy does well versus what he doesn't. And with Getsy specifically, what you can go on is, like you said, Rodgers spoke well of him. So did Jordan Love. I'm sure if we asked Malik Willis, or I'm sure I could even find a quote about Malik Willis talking about Luke Getsy and their ability to get those guys ready for everything like that. But, coordinators, position coaches, even head coaches to some degree, they are coordinators and position coaches really more so are easy fall guys to pick. This didn't go well. It's got to be the coach. It's got to be the coach that screwed this up, right? So I think that ultimately, I've seen like Steve Spagnuolo was one of the worst head coaches ever. He's a great defensive coordinator. The Chiefs have won a lot of championships with him calling their defense and stuff like that. So I think of all the things to worry about, this is on the very, very low end of that scale, if it even is something to worry about. It reminds me, my old man used to say to my mom all the time that she wasn't happy unless she had something to complain about. I feel like that's kind of how this works.
Yeah, they can't complain about Rich Bisaccia, who's no longer in Green Bay as the search for the next special teams coordinator is on. And if the Packers are serious about fixing their problems, not just on special teams, but across the roster, the good news for Green Bay, they don't have to wait long to start making those moves. Free agency could begin right now in Titletown. Who could the Packers sign? We dive into those details next on the Locked On Packers Squad Show. This episode of the Locked On Packers Squad Show is presented to you by 5 Hour Energy, and welcome to the 5 Hour Energy Flavor Draft. We're looking at every aspect of the draft to let you know which tasty flavors are the best and which ones just might be sleepers. The board is all set. The flavors are ready, and only one is going to take the top spot. 5 Hour Energy shots give you a boost with zero sugar, and there's always a very large, wide variety of flavors, always something for everyone, like strawberry banana, cotton candy, sour apple, and my current favorite, blue raspberry in my fridge right now. What I love about that blue raspberry flavor, that bold blue candy flavor, refreshing boost each and every single morning, gets me out the door and gets me going. Find your favorite flavor of 5 Hour Energy shots available online at 5hourenergy.com or at amazon.com. Thank you for making Locked On Packers your first listen of the day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. Coming up at the end of the show, get your comments lined up in the live YouTube chat. If you're over there on YouTube right now, ask us anything you want to ask Jacob or myself. We will bring your questions onto the show. We will bring you onto the big screen. We will answer your questions and we'll dive into it. We'll have some fun at the very end of the show. So if you have a question, make sure you get it lined up right now. And Jacob, before we get into the fun questions and get into the interesting things in our lives, the free agency period, technically not open, new league year, not yet for the NFL, but the Packers could, if they wanted to, they could begin shaping their roster now and making some decisions, obviously, which you have on the current roster, who is a pending free agent. But are there names out there right now in the NFL that interest you, that the Green Bay Packers could bring in right now and sign and maybe change question marks before free agency even begins?
Yeah, Tyreek. No, I'm kidding.
We brought that up on Tuesday. And
not a snowball's chance in hell.
Peter was half and half. He goes, I bet Matt LaFleur would, but Brian Gutekunst won't.
Okay.
I said that's probably accurate.
Yeah, I'm saying what I would do, and I would not. I want no part of that guy for a multitude of reasons. And not only that, I'm pretty sure he signed, sealed, delivered for Kansas City. But not the only Dolphins player that was released. The hard one that I thought I didn't realize that when I originally talked about him was James Daniels. He was a guard center, interior offensive line combination, but he's played like 12 snaps in 2 seasons because he's been injured as much as he has. I think his 2025 season lasted all of like 3 snaps before he tore his pectoral. So that stinks, but that caliber, or not that caliber, that style of player is something I think the Packers could use, an interior guy who could play guard and center. I think Daniels is a guy that you could bring in as a veteran backup type of something like that. And then you're not as worried, I guess, if he goes down. But that would be something you could probably find on the cheap. I know that the Packers kind of sniffed around a little bit during the pre-draft process as a possibility. Ultimately didn't fit kind of what they usually do with the offensive linemen in that stage of things. But something like that. The other name that's interesting from Miami, and I don't know what this is going to cost.
Miami had a fire sale, by the way.
New GM, new GM, new coach. That's kind of what happens as you start.
Familiar faces if you're Packer fans. John Eric Sullivan, Jeff Hafley running the show down there.
Yeah, I mean, remember when Goody took over here? It was like Clay Matthews, Nick Perry, like all these dudes were gone in kind of the blink of an eye for that. But when it came to the guys that they released, I don't know what he's going to cost. I've kind of been intrigued by the idea of trying to find a pass rusher who is trying to chase a championship. And I wrote a story on this a few weeks ago. Some of the names I mentioned were like Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack and Hassan Reddick I mentioned because of his connection to Jonathan Gannon, and he was awesome in Philadelphia under Gannon. Calais Campbell was another name for that. And Bradley Chubb may not quite fit that mold just because I don't know if he's getting a 1-year deal. I do know he had a connection with Vic Fangio, who's the Eagles defensive coordinator out there now, and the Eagles might have a need on the edge out there, so that's something that could certainly drive that price up. But the idea of the Packers, at least in my mind, bringing in a guy who can start when Micah Parsons starts the season on, whether it's the PUP list and he's out the first 4 games or he's just out for the first couple of games and everything like that. But the idea of a guy that then becomes that situational rusher, the role that I've compared it to is 2017, the Eagles won the Super Bowl and they had Chris Long come in as a guy who was third in pass. And he was out there to scream and rush the passer, and they would kick Brandon Graham inside. And that combination right there actually forced a fumble on Tom Brady in that Super Bowl. It ultimately ended up giving the Eagles an 8-point advantage in a game they eventually won at the end of that there. So that idea is something that I'm kind of intrigued by with the Packers. I think they could use some help on the edge just because if Parsons is going to be down. Van Ness has been, up and down. I think we're all kind of assuming that Gary and Enagbare are not going to be here. So that means.
See, I don't know about Peter. Kind of talked me into the Gary thing. Like they'll probably end up reworking that, but it didn't feel like at the end of the end of season press conferences from Goody and LaFleur that it felt like that was something that was set in stone necessarily. I do think they'll probably revisit that contract, but I don't know if they can afford to let him go. Unless they go out and grab some of the names that you're mentioning, only because like Mike is not going to be back to start the year.
Have you ever seen the movie Miracle?
I have.
Okay. So remember when Jim Craig says, "That's my net. You can't take me out of there." And then Herb Brooks says back to him, "They just scored 12 goals, Jimmy. It's everybody's net right now." Right. Well, the reason I bring that up is it's been 6 months since Rashawn Gary made an impact play on the field.
I have the same amount of sacks.
You and I have the same amount of, and I'm being a little disingenuous when I say that, but I mean, you could put, a league at the R in WAR, if you will, the replacement player on the field. I just don't know how much you want to put on the plate of Barron Sorrell, Aaron Mosby, Brenton Cox, Colin Oliver as guys to be like, hey, not only because those are guys that I just mentioned, maybe not Sorrell, but the guys after that I want on my team fighting to make the roster, not starting. You know what I mean? If they're starting, that means you've got some injuries and got some guys banged up. I mean, that could change with a training camp and everything like that. But I just don't think that's the case. So we'll see. If those guys are gone, then I think the Packers certainly have a need on the edge. I just don't know, what does that mean? Does that mean they spend a 5th round pick and then bump everybody up, and then that 5th rounder has to be a rotational or something like that? Do they sign I think that the route really is to sign a veteran who's relatively affordable and, figures out a way to, with a lesser workload, come in and rush can you get that situation? DPR is what they called Colin Oliver when they drafted him, designated pass rusher. That's not quite what someone like Joey Bosa might be, but somebody who's established, a veteran who's hungry. And if they haven't won a championship, I think that's a bonus. That was kind of it's not the only reason Julius Peppers was successful here in Green Bay, but one of the big reasons was that was a guy who was trying to take over a game at the end of the year to try and get himself into a position to win a title. He never won one during his NFL career, unfortunately.
Very close.
Yeah, played for 2 NFC title games here when he was here. The loss to Seattle and the loss to Atlanta. But I think that route is something, and Bradley Chubb could, I don't know if he fits that, just because from a pricing standpoint, he's somebody that I still think could make some money upcoming here. But if the Packers can get something like that done, for a player like that, that's where they should probably be sniffing around, with some of those guys. And he doesn't affect the comp pick formula. That's the other thing that's going to be really important this offseason for Green Bay, as they try and rebuild the roster kind of around the edges.
Speaking of rebuilding the roster, they're set to potentially lose a good chunk of their 2025-2026 team. Is there anybody on that unrestricted free agent list that is currently on the Packers that will be likely testing the waters here in a couple of weeks that you think they do bring back? Just to name a few names: Quay Walker. I think we can all agree Malik Willis will probably find greener pastures with a lot more dollars. Sean Ryan in there, Nick Neiman, who we mentioned is a special teams guy, Romeo Dobbs, Emmanuel Wilson, Bo Melton. Let's see, Emmanuel Wilson's a restricted free agent. So any other names on there that I've rattled off that you think actually does come back and retains for it to become a Green Bay Packer in next season?
No. Maybe Quay Walker, just because of the comments Gutekunst has made in the past about wanting to keep him in the fold, and with the way Jonathan Gannon, with the things he's traditionally asked his linebackers to do, then that's something where ideally the athleticism of Quay Walker probably plays a little bit better than that of Isaiah McDuffie. But it's hard telling, man, because Rasheed Walker, that one's obvious. I feel like that was obvious even before Gutekunst made his comments. That felt like a final nail in the coffin on the way out there. Dobbs, I think we've kind of known the deal there for well over a year, especially once they drafted Golden. That was the end of Romeo Dobbs in Green Bay. And especially then once they drafted Savion Williams. But
or is this little put your tinfoil hat on, is Matthew Golden going to be the eventual end of Jaden Reed?
I think,
and they keep Romeo Dobbs. I don't know how much money Romeo Dobbs will demand. It depends on where you look at his market value. It's possible. I don't know if that's the spot they need to focus their roster on. And we're doing a deep dive on our free agency focus during the offseason here with Peter and Coach Jags. But like, could you see that kind of working itself out? Because that's going to be the next conversation is, okay, you also got to figure out Christian Watson, because he did sign that extension, but you need to extend the extension because that's only a 1-year extension that he signed prior to the beginning of this year. You obviously have Matthew Golden. Dontavian Wicks is going to have an expiring deal here soon, and Jaden Reed's right behind him. So there are big questions at that wide receiver position. They know what they have in Romeo Dobbs. Jordan Love seems to trust Romeo Dobbs. I know everybody will go back and remember that onside failed attempt that he had in Chicago, but he also was the best receiver on the field for both teams in the wild card round a few weeks later at Soldier Field.
And has 2 100-yard receiving games in the playoffs. And I think Dobbs is one of those players that they let him walk, and then next year we are talking about how they miss him, and that doesn't make it the wrong decision to let him walk. And you asked about Jaden Reed. I don't think Jaden Reed's going to get a second contract in Green Bay anyways. So that's a separate conversation for another day. But when we're talking about, you just mentioned guys on offense, right? So within the next year or two, significant players on offense who have an expiring contract. So Dobbs this year, obviously.
Yep. Then
you have Watson, Reed, Kraft, Musgrave to a lesser extent, and Wicks. That's just on offense. Then you go to defense, Edgerrin Cooper, Devontae Wyatt, Lucas Van Ness, Evan Williams, Javon Bullard. Like, there are guys, like, eventually it's kind of like that old saying, if you can't keep everybody, obviously.
I mean, the cap is going up, but so are salaries.
Sure, yeah, and the salaries in Green Bay are going to go. So, like, what Jordan Love makes now, he doesn't make 2 years from now. They can mess with some of that stuff, sure, but like, I really don't. I don't think some of these guys that we're talking about are going to be back in Green Bay, and some of those decisions get made on their own, right? Like, if Jaden Reed has the same exact season this year that he had this past year.
Well, he was injured, good chunk of it.
That's what I mean, though. Like, that's an easier decision to make, because if he's not on the field, then it's like, well, how much can we trust this guy? That's not his fault. I always hate this kind of line of thinking, but it's not his fault that he's not on the field. But how much can you trust to give big money to a player who's kind of been in and out of the lineup? That is a question fairly-ish about Christian Watson as well. But to me, you've seen the numbers of Watson with him on the field versus not.
Different offense, man. It's a different team.
Oh, yeah. And I think you can.
That's your alpha. Like, that's your guy. That's your.
And for the long term or medium term, whatever way you want to put it, I think you can build that offense around. If your starting blocks are Christian Watson and Tucker Kraft, and then with Matthew Golden ascending, I think you feel really good about your offense moving forward from the skill standpoint. And then Green Bay can kind of fill in the edges. And still, as much as we've mocked, well, not we, but people have mocked the Packers for never taking receivers in the first round, they have been dynamite at picking receivers for forever. Even Wicks is a useful player. And I say even Wicks like he's bad, but like, he was a 5th round pick. He's a useful player. And if he had like a full season's worth of starter reps or something like that, he'd have those numbers that you're looking at. So I just, to come full circle back on this question, I don't think that Dobbs is somebody who is going to be back. The only one who I think is a maybe is Quay Walker. And
let me ask you one more for defense, because I didn't bring him up, and we kind of talked about the pass rushing hole that the Packers could potentially have, depending on what they do with Rashawn Gary, obviously Micah Parsons with the ACL, and obviously the hope is still out there for LVN. Kingsley Enagbare for the Green Bay Packers. He is an unrestricted free agent as well. Do you think that's somebody that Green Bay could realistically keep?
Yeah, for a while, a popular theory was like to cut Gary and use Gary's money and just give it to Enagbare and let him roll. To me, Enagbare, you kind of know what he is. And he's a good player. I'm not trying to make him sound like he's a bum. He's a good player. But I'm ready to see Lucas Van Ness as a starter full time. And unless, if there's a trade, if the Raiders call and say, we'll pay 90% of the salary for Max Crosby and give you for a 5th round pick, then sure. Max Crosby could start across from
very unlikely to happen.
Right. I could also win the lottery tomorrow and buy the Dallas Cowboys away from Jerry Jones. Like, that is something that could, in theory, happen. Right. But unless something like that happens, I'm ready for Van Ness to start. And I think that you can give Enagbare snaps to Barron Sorrell and get similar production for cheaper, and also then potentially have more money to play with on the free agent market for a pass rusher, a cornerback, an offensive lineman, wherever it is that you want to find some of these pieces to put things together, instead of saying, hey, here's and pass rushers don't make like no money. So it's not like they're going to say like, hey, here's a $5 million a year deal for Enagbare. I bet you he gets a decent sized contract this offseason.
Big offseason, no doubt about it, for the Green Bay Packers. Free agency, just one part of it. The draft, just another. Roster construction, never really ending for general managers. Ultimately, every single one of those decisions falls on the lap of Brian Gutekunst, and this might be the most important offseason of his career. Those details coming up right after this on the Locked On Packers Squad Show. Tonight's Locked On Packers Squad Show is brought to you by Indeed sponsored jobs, workplace chaos, deadline stacking up, inboxes overflowing, and the one position you have to fill is still sitting open. When the pressure's on and you need the right hire, this is a job for Indeed sponsored jobs. They help you reach the people who actually fit what you're looking for, the skills, the experience, the location. So you're not just hoping the right candidate stumbles across your post. And here's a stat that says it all. In the 30 seconds I've been talking to you, companies like yours have made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all of your boxes. Less stress, less time, and more results. When you need the right person to cut through the chaos, this is a job for Indeed sponsored jobs. And listeners in the show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help get your job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. Just go to Indeed.com/podcast Indeed.com/podcast right now and support the Locked On Packers Squad Show by saying you heard about it on Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions do apply. You need a hire? This is a job for Indeed sponsored jobs. Once again, Indeed.com/podcast. Micah Parsons is here. Jordan Love is here. Xavier McKinney is here. Your stars are in place right now as it stands for the Green Bay Packers. You could put Tucker Kraft into that category as well. I know they're coming back from injuries, but the window right now, I think collectively, Jacob, Packer fans would agree is open. You know what you have in Jordan Love. You got one of the best pass rushers in Micah Parsons. You got Matt LaFleur's contract sewed up. You're good to go there. Obviously, you're looking for your special teams coordinator, but I would make the case, and I think most Packer fans, Jacob, would make the case that the Super Bowl window is now for the Green Bay Packers. Going into 2023, the jury was obviously still out on Jordan Love. We weren't sure exactly what he was going to be. He changed our perception pretty quickly in Chicago to kick off things in 2023. 2024 battled some injuries, but we still were giving it another year or so. Then all that changed on August 28th of 2025 when the Green Bay Packers went out and traded for Micah Parsons. Then Tucker Kraft emerged as a star tight end, probably would have been, in my opinion, the best tight end at that position, the best player at his position, had it not been for that freak ACL injury. If you had to pinpoint it, is this the most important offseason that Brian Gutekunst has faced because of what the Packers are facing when it comes to not only is the division getting better, the NFC feels to be getting better as a whole, but your pieces are finally in place. You don't have major question marks at those big positions. Do you feel like this is kind of where Goody has to rise, above the rest and kind of take this roster, make these decisions? I know they're facing an unfair advantage with looking for a special teams coordinator a week before the combine, but do you think this is the most important offseason Goody has faced yet as the general manager of the Green Bay Packers?
Yes. And I guess it's easier to say that now just because I know how all the other seasons have turned out leading up to now. But like going into the season where Jordan Love became the starting quarterback, that was a really important offseason to put players around him that could make him successful while also getting the most bang for your buck in a trade for Aaron Rodgers. You obviously want to nail that draft and everything like that. The Packers have had multiple first-round picks a couple different times. I feel like those have been pretty important off seasons as well. The offseason following the Zadarius Smith, Preston Smith offseason, where I think they ended up signing Christian Kirksey, and that was really about it as far as guys that they were able to bring in that year. But still, I think this year is a big one because going from 19 to 20, the Packers were in the NFC Championship game in 2019, but clearly outclassed by the 49ers twice that year when they got to that spot, right? And then in 2020, they kind of blew it. They blew it. And then going from 2020 to 2021, it's not like the Packers were able to do a bunch of stuff and make moves, and they had the drama with the quarterback and everything else that comes to it. Is now the difference between that and now is like you have to be better because you don't have a first round pick. You don't have it's kind of like the old John Lynch argument of like, oh, Lynch is such a good drafter. It's like, well, everybody would have picked Nick Bosa. Like, how hard can that possibly be, right? Goody doesn't have those premium draft assets. It's easy to spend money and make those flashy, sexy moves too, because everybody loves those and nobody points them out when they're wrong. It's like, oh, that turned out to be a bad move, but at least they spent a lot of money. If the F them picks Rams were still searching for their first championship, people would be like, well, they gave it a shot. At least it didn't work, Gutekunst now has to do it with limited cap space and no first-round draft pick to build around a team that is, I think, ready to win a championship, but also has, Gutekunst has proven over his time frame to have some blind spots or things that come to roster building up. We've talked about the lack of veterans on the roster with the way Green Bay does those things. We've talked about the lack of, returner that they've had on the roster for the last couple of years, and I think that sometimes he's taken gambles and he's been too reliant on, last year at defensive tackle, for example, they had the additions to that room were a 6th round pick and an undrafted free agent. And it was like, they have to step up and we feel good about that. Or the cornerback room, they signed Nate Hobbs. So, that's about all they did there. But then it was, they've had a 7th round pick at that position and it was okay. So they're one injury away from Micah Robinson or Bo Melton having to play cornerback last year. That was not a positive situation for anybody. It feels like every year we're almost looking at this need is so incredibly obvious, and anybody who watches this team knows it, and except for the Packers. And I know that you can't address every need. I know you can't do everything for every player, but at some point, like, you can't go into next year saying Hobbs, Nixon, Valentine, those are our three corners. Wooden, Brooks, and Wyatt, those are our three defensive tackles. Like, those are the main guys that we want to have. And then we're going to run out of gas by the end of every single game. Just stuff like that, right? I think that that's where Gutekunst maybe I don't want to use this phrase because I know he did it with Micah Parsons, but like step outside of that comfort zone or that familiar zone, if you will. It's okay if a player is 31, 32, and you're signing him as a hired gun, essentially, instead of a long-term contract culture player or something like that. It's okay if you bring in a guy or two like that. Find your version of Julius Peppers. Yeah. That's what and it doesn't have to be a pass rusher like that, but I'm just saying find your version, because Julius Peppers was outside of Ted Thompson's comfort zone for all the reasons I just mentioned. He was very similar in that way. So
yeah, and he's been like, he'll go out, like he'll dip his toes into free agency. Like, he's cut from the Ted Thompson cloth, but he's a little bit of Ron Wolf, a little bit of Ted Thompson. Like, he's right in the middle. And I think he has his faults. There's no doubt about it. When I look at this season, Jacob, like there are no more excuses, right? Like, you're obviously going to have, you'll see what Micah Parsons and Tucker Kraft are off of their ACL tears, but ACL tears aren't like they used to be. I anticipate both of those guys being elite. And I know he's an alien, but look what Christian Watson did in less time, than was expected with his ACL tear and what he did for the Packers when he returned in Pittsburgh. But everything is set right now. And that's why I say, and not necessarily set in a good way, but it's set. Like, you have the cornerstones to build a championship team, but you have to fill in the spots that you've kind of neglected. Like, offensive line hasn't been great. Like, the depth hasn't been great for the last few years under Brian Gutekunst. We talked about the special teams really not being something they've really dove a ton into. And you can blame Rich, you can blame Matt, you can blame Goody, however you want to, pie chart the blame out for those three guys. Like, it ultimately falls on the guy building the roster, I think, for the most part. So he's got to do a better job at filling those holes. But I do believe that when I look at this team, and the NFC North is getting better, the NFC as a whole is kind of a dogfight, up and down, especially out there in the NFC West, and the NFC North is right behind them as far as the toughest division. But the excuses are kind of gone, I think. And I hate to, and people of the, the everydayers, the Locked On Packers squad show, they'll know I'm a hashtag Goody guy, and I've defended him, when others necessarily haven't. But it is time where you got to kind of, don't even look that far. Like, I hate to use Chicago as a good example, but what's the GM's name in Chicago? Ryan Poles. I wanted to say Pace, but I knew it was a Ryan. Ryan Poles.
They had Ryan Pace before Ryan.
I know that. I knew it was a Ryan. I couldn't think of his last name. Look what they did with that offensive line in one offseason. One offseason, he completely changed their entire season with the decisions he made. And
that's an example right there, Chicago, more specifically, of a blind spot that Gutekunst had, because before the offseason began, and I gave the Aaron Banks acquisition the benefit of the doubt, right?
I did too.
But would you rather trade a 4th-round pick for this draft this year, so not last year's draft, a year in advance, for Joe Thuney, who's all-world, all-pro, one of the best guards in all of football, or 4 years, $77 million for Aaron Banks? Even if I told you those players were going to play like to a relatively normal standard, you take Joe Thuney 100% of the time. Yeah. Like, that's an example of leaning young, leaning to an ascending player, which usually is a good thing. Sometimes that means Zadarius Smith, right? When Zadarius Smith got signed, they gave him an F for free agent grades because he wasn't a impact player when Green Bay signed him to that contract.
Yeah. Out of Baltimore, yep.
But sometimes it's Aaron Banks, and you've got a guy like Joe Thuney who was like I don't want to call him like the heartbeat of Chicago's team, but like that interior offensive line.
I think it was, though. I mean, he won the inaugural, I don't know what the best blocker award is for the NFL Honors Awards, but I mean, he was one of the best, if not the best offensive line in all of football.
Yeah, and I mean, you can't acquire every player, and there's not interest. I understand all that, but that is an example of Gutekunst missing on something. And the other thing, when you're talking about being out of excuses, once upon a time when Ted Thompson was building this team, and even Goody to some degree, Vikings, Bears, Lions, not good. They weren't good teams. Now, probably not Minnesota, but you could talk me into any of those other three
Minnesota
teams.
can change, though, very quickly. I mean, if they land, I would not take them out of the running for Malik Willis. If they land a quarterback, like that team, that roster is really good.
I don't think they'll get Malik Willis, and I think their cap situation is
not good. It's not good. It's not good. But if they were able to figure out that quarterback, I guess it's a big if, but that's still a very talented.
If you tell me Aaron Rodgers signs there tomorrow, then sure, I could then maybe see them winning. And they did win what, 9 games this year with
Correct.
You and I playing quarterback. But I mean, that would be the most surprising one, right? Is if Minnesota won it. The other 3 teams, though, you can tell me any of those 3 teams win the division, and it's like it's not. You can't pencil in 2 easy wins against Chicago like you used to be able to. That is a team that has now beaten you 3 of the last 4 times that you've played them, and kind of pulled your pants down the last 2 times in some embarrassing fashion with the way, we can always sit here and say they fell apart. And it was. I hate the line of who beat whom and did Green Bay win or did Chicago lose or vice versa, I guess in this case. Who cares? What matters is what happened on the scoreboard at the end of the game. And Chicago won the last 2. Green Bay was winning 21-3 and they blew it. Like, that's the case with, and what Gutekunst has to build with this team and get everybody on the same page, because he sounded frustrated, which we talked about a couple shows ago.
He did, yeah.
But get everybody in the same page, pulling the same direction, and put this roster in a position where you're not going, man, I hope they don't circle this linebacker just to throw a position out there as a guaranteed weak spot on this team. And we knew about it in March. You know what I mean? That's something else too, that I do wonder if next year at the trade deadline, if Gutekunst could be a little more active at the deadline, simply because he knows he's getting a chest of compensatory picks. So trading a 5th round pick isn't as big of a deal when you know you're getting one back. That's speculation entirely, but that's something that Seattle did this year. They traded for Rashid Shaheed,
and it changed their season.
And he was an impact player on offense and special teams. So that's something that I hope Gutekunst figures out that he needs to do.
I just think it's the most important, because you got to nail it. Like, there's so many holes that are on this roster: the offensive line, the defensive line, the cornerback room. Everywhere else, I think you're pretty stable, but you have your best players in their prime right now, entering their prime. Xavier McKinney, Micah Parsons, Tucker Kraft, Jordan Love. Like, the opportunity right now to get out of that 7 seed, or if you're going to stay in that 7 seed, advance into the postseason. You hope that they're not in the 7 seed, but if they are going to be, advance in the postseason and take this team to the next level, because you have these guys in their prime. You could throw Josh Jacobs in there. I would anticipate he's going to be part of the roster. There's some whispers that it's possible, he could be a cap casualty guy, but I don't think he should be either. But again, he's another one of those core pieces too, where he's in his prime and he's a great player at his position. Like, the time right now for Goody to nail the offseason is right now. Those other years, I'll give him a little bit of leeway. We didn't know what we had in Jordan Love, and obviously you didn't have Mike on the team before last season, but this year you do. You know what you have, and Tucker Kraft is in that conversation as well. So I think without question, he has got to nail this offseason in Green Bay. All right, you guys have heard from Jacob and I all show long. It's time to hear from you. I have a few questions lined up in our live YouTube chat. If you have a question, you can ask Jacob and I anything. It is your time to shine on the Locked On Packers Squad Show. Ask us anything, coming up right after this on the Locked On Packers Squad Show.
Hey, it's Matt Derry from the Locked On Lions podcast. The people I love depend on me. If I'm gone, the financial responsibilities don't disappear. I didn't want my family figuring things out during the hardest moment of their lives. That's why I knew only one place to go. I chose life insurance through my friends at Ethos. Ethos makes getting life insurance fast and easy, 100% online. You can get a quote in seconds, apply in minutes, and get same-day coverage. There's no medical exam. You just answer a few simple health questions. You can get up to $3 million in coverage. Some policies are as low as $30 a month. I love the folks at Ethos. Protect your family with life insurance from Ethos now by going to ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. In as little as 10 minutes, you can get the free quote and up to $3 million in coverage at ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. That is ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. Ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. Application times and rates may vary.
Thank you for making Locked On Packers your first listen of the day, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcasting Network. Remember, wherever you guys get audio podcasts, you can listen to the Locked On Packers as well as over on YouTube, where we got people lined up right now. It is Ask Us Anything. Any questions you have for Jacob or myself, bring them to the show. We will get you on. We'll break it down. We'll answer your questions. And we sort of touched on this one, Jacob, at the beginning of the show, but Scotty Penn over on YouTube has a question. What is your opinion of Jeff Stoutland? Is he valuable enough to warrant offensive line coach and assistant head coach? I think both of us were in agreement that it's yes, but there would obviously have to be some sort of movement with Luke Butkus. But to answer the question for Scotty Penn, Jacob, your opinion of Jeff Stoutland. You're very familiar with those Eagles and what they've been able to do as far as the offensive line goes for the last decade or so.
Yeah, and having listened to, Jason Kelsey, I know that he's like kind of overexposed at this point, but really smart football mind, and obviously a Hall of Famer that was a sixth round, late, I don't remember sixth round exactly, but a day 3 draft pick, became a Hall of Famer. Jordan Mailata is a rugby player, became a Hall of Famer. Lane Johnson was a top 5 pick, but still under that tutelage became a Hall of Famer.
Coming back for his 14th year as well.
Oh yeah, he is. Actually the set hut, if you will, of the Philly special is Nick Foles yelling Lane, Lane. But him coming back, Landon Dickerson, Cam Jurgens, Isaac Sumalo, Mekhi Becton, who just got released today by the Chargers, was a guy who had his best season with the Eagles. I don't think that was a coincidence to me. And again, I don't know if Luke Butkus is good at his job or not. I don't know what Adam Stenovich's role in that offensive line room is or not. I could just tell you what I see on the field is the Packers have made a lot of investment in that position by signing Aaron Banks. Jordan Morgan was a first-round pick. Anthony Belton was a high second-round pick, or not high, but a second-round pick. And the offensive line stunk last year. Let's just call it what it was. They stunk. And it's not for lack of investment because of everything I just mentioned. I know whenever a team picks an offensive lineman, unless it's painfully obvious that they need one, everybody just kind of rolls their eyes and goes, "Oh, a lineman, really?" Like I remember when those conversations had because they took Elton Jenkins instead of, I think it was DK Metcalf and AJ Brown at the time. But it was just like, yeah, Elton Jenkins turned out to be really, really good for them for a very long time.
He's an all-pro. That worked out.
Yeah, it was just fine. That's one of those. I always joke it's a famously healthy position. The 5 guys you start with at the beginning of the year and probably not going to be the 5 guys you end with.
All right, let's stick with the offensive line because Vandy the Man 09 over on YouTube. And if you guys are over on YouTube, make sure you hit that subscribe button for me. He asks, any possibility that we can get Tyler Linderbaum from Baltimore? Yes. I don't know if that's realistic, but I would sign my name, Jacob, on the dotted line. If there was only one free agent the Packers could sign, and that includes internally, sign me up for him out of Baltimore. That would solidify the center position for the Green Bay Packers.
I think Jags said the same exact thing last week about if there was one guy, they come down and say like the football god, so you can have one free agent, like Linderbaum is the guy that I would pick as well. But great player out of Iowa. Was one of those guys that if he played left tackle and had the same level of production and everything, he was a first-round pick and in slam dunk one. Because he played center, he probably fell further than what he should have. Yeah. And the Ravens that year was so stupid. They got Kyle Hamilton and Tyler Linderbaum in the first round. Those were 2 of the 10 best players in the first round. They got them well outside of the top 10 because of positional value, which is a reminder to, maybe just pick good players. But, that's a separate topic for a different day. I think he would solidify the pivot position. I don't think that Green Bay has a center option realistically in-house, and that includes Sean Ryan and Elton Jenkins. I think Jenkins gets released. I would let Sean Ryan walk. I don't think the Packers are overly thrilled with Sean Ryan either, just based on their actions. And Jacob Monk is started one game, and it was a game that they actively did not care about. So I don't have much to say on what Green Bay has internally. If they could do that, I think they will. I also think that if Baltimore doesn't sign him before he hits the market, it feels like he goes to the Giants, which is where John Harbaugh went. And that feels like a culture setter kind of thing for Harbaugh as he sets up his new shop.
He's 25 years old, man. That like Baltimore letting him even test the open market should be a crime. I'm sensing a theme, Jacob, with the questions in the Ask Us Anything portion of the Locked On Packers squad show, because we had talked. First 2 questions were in regards to the offensive line and who the Packers could go out and hire as the coach and who they could go out and sign as their center. And Troy over on YouTube is asking about the interior of the defensive line now for the Green Bay Packers. He asks, What about moving Rashawn Gary to the interior defensive line? He's 6'5", 290-ish now. Any thoughts, Jacob? You watched him at Michigan. You're a Michigan guy. You're obviously covering the Green Bay Packers. Any thoughts on possibly if the Packers are going to keep him and maybe rework that contract, or if they don't? Any thoughts on moving Rashawn Gary to the inside?
Yeah, first of all, I love the questions because if there is no football player on this earth that matters that weighs less than 260 pounds. Let me just be very clear when I say something like that. But with Gary, number one, I don't know where you're getting your numbers. If you're guessing, I can tell you from.
I'll pull him up right now.
Yeah, I know when he was drafted, he weighed like 275 or something like that. I would guess that number is probably right
he's
around
not terribly far off. Okay, so according to the Google machine, this is off the Packers.com website, 6'5", 280.
280. Okay, so
he's not far off. Yeah,
more than I thought he was. That being said, Gary did some stuff like that when he was in college. They kicked him inside every now and again with Don Brown's defense.
You bring up college. It also says here, this is off of the University of Michigan. He was listed as 283 at Michigan.
Yeah, so that sounds about right.
Yeah.
He just hasn't done it in so long. And it's something he could do like as a special package or a sub package type of thing. This isn't like Madden where we can just say, move this guy. It's like the Lucas Van Ness thing. Cause that's kind of the go-to answer for stuff like that. It's like Lucas Van Ness weighs 270. He's not going to defend the run. Like passing situations that are obvious. Sure. But other than that, I don't think that's in the cards. And Gary, by the same token, moving, position move, defensive ends make more money than defensive tackles. That's a lot to ask for a player to move his position as well. Like there's a pride thing that goes into that. And Gary, for all that he is a very proud man from what I've been able to gather from him. So there are solutions. I just don't think that's one of them.
Fantastic questions. Appreciate you guys participating on the Locked On Packers Squad Show. It's usually Ask Coach Jags anything. Coach Jags got pulled into a late meeting, so he's unable to attend the show this evening.
So I want to ask
him
why that meeting is more important than this show.
I asked him that. He goes, I'm sorry. I'm like, no, you can't be sorry. I'm going to miss you tonight. I need you on the show. And
they must pay him more or something.
He is, he's a very important person. So he'll be back with us next Thursday for Ask Coach Jags anything. But my thanks to each and every one of you guys for tuning in. That'll do it for tonight's show. Thank you guys for participating. Friendly reminder, if you guys didn't already know, the Locked On Packers Squad Show and Daily Show with Peter Bukowski, free and available wherever you guys get audio podcasts, and of course over on YouTube. And if you're watching over on YouTube right now, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the thumbs up on the videos, and make sure you hit that little notification bell. Get notified when we go live. For Jacob, for myself, we'll sign off for now, but we'll be right back on Tuesday night. Me, Peter Bukowski, and Coach Jags getting ready to talk more Packers off-season football with each and every one of you. And thanks to you guys for tuning in. Thank you for making Locked On Packers part of your day each and every single day. And as always, make sure you stay locked on Packers.